You need to have the answers ready before the problems arise and learn the lessons today, because tomorrow could be too late.
Time spent in preparation is always time well spent, often lives well saved, sometimes even the difference between success and failure. The timings, the actions, everything must be rehearsed by day and if possible by night, until every man knows what is expected of him and what he should expect of everyone else.
Today we're going to be discussing wet weather gear and everything that you need to know about maintaining it and considerations when you're in the field. I figured what better day to explain this stuff than to get out here when it's actually raining and talk about all of the wet weather gear that you'll need to sustain yourself and ultimately stay dry in the field. So with that, let's get into it. So why is wet weather gear important? Well, as you probably know, you don't want to get wet in the field. When we get wet, we get cold. And when we get cold, we risk hypothermia. Not only that, but when we're cold and wet, we're also burning more calories, but more importantly, we're lowering morale, which means that we're lowering our ultimate effectiveness in the field. So we're going to discuss everything that you need to know in terms of equipment and then methods and techniques to stay dry. Now remember, you can't stop yourself from getting completely dry, so you're going to be wet at some point, but what we're trying to do is ultimately mitigate getting cold. If we can keep our core body temperature dry and all of that moisture level physically touching our body low, then we stand a better chance of, again, not becoming hypothermic, staying dry and warm, and therefore keeping our effectiveness level as high as it can be. In conjunction with all of those factors, the wet and cold can ultimately damage our equipment, be it our sleeping systems, our clothing, electronics, and rifles and combat equipment. We want to keep everything as dry as possible. Again, we're trying to mitigate this. Don't get upset when your gear does get wet. That's why we're going to show methods right now to, kind of help either keeping equipment dry or quick ways to dry it off. Let's talk about the basics of waterproofing. Ultimately, we're creating a barrier. That might sound like common sense, but that barrier can actually work against us. Our body, as we sweat, permeates moisture. So if we have a barrier in between that, we're going to get a layer that is trapping the moisture from our body, but also the moisture from the outside. So like anything in the field, it's going to be a balancing game. Depending on how heavy it's raining, depending on where you are, what type of environment you're in, will mitigate the type of equipment and the methods that you use. Ultimately, we're trying to find a nice balance point between staying dry, but also keeping enough water out. Again, don't be scared to accept that you're going to get wet, you're going to get a little bit cold, but again, we're trying to keep our effectiveness at the highest level possible. So let's talk about equipment. We're going to work from the body outwards. So we're going to start with our body and then go into our equipment, pack, and then extras from there. So your basic kit is going to start with what you're physically wearing on your body. This is going to be your base uniform or your base clothing. We discussed a lot of this in our introduction to fieldcraft and equipment. But this clothing, depending on your environment, again, hot weather, temperate like we are now, or cold weather, is going to mitigate what that will be. You don't want to bunch up on thermal layers. Thermal layers ultimately absorb water. So what we want to create is have our base layer like a wool or moisture wicking underlayer or shirt, some sort of medium layer. So that's going to be what I'm wearing now, either a light jacket, a BDU uniform, and our trousers. We want that to be waterproofed to an extent, enough to shed a light rain like right now. These aren't getting wet, they're just kind of shedding the water, they're accepting it. you know, a light medium rain like we're seeing today. On top of that, we've got our caps, our boonies and our helmets. So you can see I'm wearing a cap, and then on top of this I have my hood. I have a light rain jacket on, and all this is shedding this light rain. Underneath here I'm just wearing a basic moisture wicking shirt because it's not really cold out. Again, I'm just keeping that water off of my body. With hoods, oftentimes, depending on the environment we're going to be in, we might not want to wear them. We might only want to wear our boonie cap or our helmets because a hood actually covers your peripherals. I can't see as well on my sides. So if I'm in an area where I need my vision and my senses, I'm going to take this hood down and just wear a cap. Another reason for this is the sound of the hood as we move our head is also going to take away that sense of hearing. So by taking the hood off and just wearing the cap, I can already hear so much more. We get more peripheral vision and more of our senses back. So even when you wear a rain jacket or a Goretex layer, just consider that, you know, you're gonna need some sort of head protection. Oftentimes, unless we're sleeping or we're in a very safe environment, that hood actually isn't gonna be a very good option. Moving down from here are gonna be our boots. So right now I'm wearing Bates boots. They are a full grain leather, and with a Goretex as well. These are great for a temperate environment like we're seeing now. You know, I've got a puddle, I can put them in the puddle, no problem. I like boots that have a leather band that comes a little bit higher. Again, that way I can step in mud, water, puddles, and not worry about my feet getting wet. The boot comes pretty high. If you're in a more wet weather environment, you might want to go for a jungle boot. These actually have drainage holes. Again, they don't just let water in, they don't just let water out, but they let water in as well. So consider your environment. But for most temperate environments, you're going to want to keep that water out. Again, if your feet get wet, that's something that you've just got to accept. To help that, we're going to wear a full merino wool sock. This is really going to help with that moisture wicking capability and keep our feet dry. The last thing we want is our feet to become wet. We're going to talk more about that later in this video. So for our footwear, again, a full grain leather boot if you're going into a rainy environment. If you know you're going to get light showers, something like Goretex is fine, although there's lots of research done that Goretex loses its ability once small mud particles permeate that membrane that allows that moisture to escape. Again, talking about our barrier, we have our skin that's permeating sweat and that wet outdoor layer as well. So we kind of get a barrier of moisture. We want to mitigate that. Goretex, does it do this? It does. Argument is it has to be treated, cleaned, or brand new. So make sure, again, you're taking care of your equipment. A good principle to always remember when it comes to our wet weather equipment is you're going to want to buy a size larger. The reason is you want tons of room. It's going to help create a barrier of warm air, which is going to help keep you warm. That warm air is also going to help dry your equipment. When this wet material touches our skin, that's when we have a hard time staying warm, and that's where we ultimately get wet and cold. So a large garment is actually going to create an air barrier that's going to help warm and keep you dry. On top of this, when we've got equipment on, that larger jacket is going to be a lot easier to put over our equipment or have our equipment on top of. So when picking our wet weather jackets, you want to go a size up. All of my jackets are large or extra large. They're bigger than I need them to be. That's why you'll see they look kind of puffy. Looks kind of weird, but trust me, it has a far more practical reason. All right, so now we're going to talk about our Goretex kit. As with all of our equipment, where we stage it is going to be important. Let's say that a torrential downpour starts. I've got to be able to get that Goretex immediately. So where's it going to be? It's going to be the first thing I get into my pack. Drop that. And here's my Goretex. It's easy, it's accessible, so let's put it on and talk about it. Okay, so I've got my first layer of Goretex on. This is that really heavy Goretex. It's not a light rain jacket. It's not lighter Goretex, allows me to breathe. It's a very heavy rain jacket. This is not meant to allow my sweat out. It is meant to stop heavy rains. So the first thing you'll notice about it, especially when choosing a jacket, this is a British Army DPM wet weather jacket. The US military has great ones, very, very good design. So their wet weather system is awesome. You'll notice that I've got the hood tucked away. Again, going back to, if you're in an environment, you don't want that hood, messing around when you put kit on. You want it nice and stowed, and the option to deploy it if you need to. You can see the jacket's very big. That's because I can actually wear this over my chest rig, my rifle, whatever it is. It's also got Velcro as well as a zip, so if I have to put it on quickly, I can. And it's got nice pockets as well to stow whatever you might need. So I'll put this on when I know I'm in a heavy rain. Maybe it's a wet environment, I'm going to go to sleep, and I want to keep that rain 100% out. A step up from this, if it gets real crazy, we're very rarely going to use these. Is going to be our trousers. So these are USMC, United States Marine Corps Goretex trousers. What I love about these is they've got what I call fake pockets. This means that you can put it over your uniform and you can access what you actually have inside of your base uniform. They also have very large side zippers, so you don't need to take off any clothing. You're only going to use your trousers when you get an absolute torrential downpour or in cold weather or something like that. So what I like about these is I can just put them over everything very, very quickly. So let me demonstrate that now. And there you go, that's it. Super, super easy, goes right over my normal trousers. Again, what's fantastic about these is I can access my trousers and whatever I had on my original uniform. Some Goretex will have a separate pocket. That's actually very annoying because now you've got to transfer everything, or you're like digging under your belt line, doing all this sort of awkward stuff. So I like these Goretex over trousers because I can just don this on very, very quickly. Another great thing about Goretex, or your waterproof layer, is when we do wet weather river crossings, which is something we're going to demonstrate, not in this video but in another one, what you're going to do is you're going to actually put this on because it sheds water. It's going to dry pretty quickly. You're going to take off all of your dry clothing, put them into your waterproof ruck, and then we're actually going to do our river crossing in our full Goretex because we know that this can just we can just shake that water out. It's not going to permeate the fabric. The downside to Goretex, again, all these weather layers, is you've got to take really good care of them. You've got to keep them dry. You can't let mold grow on them. When you get back to camp or home, you've got to make sure that you hang them up and then you treat them with something like Nick Wax or some sort of waterproofing treatment. Again, take good care of your kit, guys, and it will take good care of you. So there's Goretex and everything. Let's move on to the next level. Step up from our heavy rain layers for torrential downpours, or when we're just kind of waiting around, we're not doing much, is going to be our poncho. This stuff can get expensive, guys, so if you don't want to go out and spend the money, I fully understand. But one absolute must you've got to have is going to be your poncho. So your USGI poncho is a fantastic bit of equipment. Essentially, this can be a shelter. It is, again, that complete polyurethane, I believe, waterproof material. You are going to sweat in this when you're doing physical activity and it is heavy raining. It's not going to let your body moisture out, but it is going to keep you dry. And what's fantastic about these is we can put them on over a pack and we can wear our equipment. So they're very, very quick. They keep you dry, but it is the absolute most basic. It's got a hood also, and then it's got snaps. So I'm going to put this on and demonstrate how you wear this with equipment. So right now, as you can see, I've donned the poncho. This is more of a ready position where all you've got is your poncho. We would have our Goretex on if that wasn't an option, but instead you can see I've got all of my equipment nice and dry underneath this poncho, and then I've got my weapon ready in case anything happens. Now another option is to put our weapon underneath the poncho, which is very easy. All we do is we just take our hood off and then we just wear it underneath, and then essentially we become this draped poncho all over all of our equipment. It's keeping all of our gear dry, and that's the main job of it. So it's very, very cheap. They're very easy to get. Again, if we start moving in this, we're going to start really sweating because this is not going to let any moisture through. But what it is going to do is keep our pack and all of our equipment dry while also allowing our arms to move. A quick note, why am I not wearing gloves? When it's soaking wet, unless you have waterproof gloves, all your gloves are going to do are going to soak your hands, and they're going to get absolutely, well, one, your gloves are going to get ruined. Gloves are also made of very thick foam material or insulation, so they're very hard to dry out. If you're in the field, if it's raining, if it's not very, very cold outside, I honestly recommend just having bare hands if you can help it, and then putting on those gloves again if you're working, if you're doing something that does require them. But if I'm just on, a ruck, if I'm hiking, if I'm going from A to B, then I just like, in a wet environment, my hands to be just completely free. What I'll do is on my war belt or my webbing, I'll have my gloves or in my pocket, again, readily accessible in case I do need to don them and put them on. Okay, so now that we're taking our poncho off, how are we going to put this away? What we want to do is drape the hood, and then we're rolling downwards. We do not want the inside of this poncho to get wet. Again, if we're in the field, this poncho is probably permanently going to stay wet, so we want the outside to be wet but not the inside. And then what I like to do is literally just roll it up like that and then put it in my pack. Just keeps the inside of it dry and stops the, if you start scrolling up, the water's going to get inside, and this is just a good way of essentially keeping it nice and dry. And if you want to deploy it, you just find the end, roll it out, and now you've got it ready on the side that you want. Drape it over, and then you're good to go. So now I'm wearing everything for essentially a wet weather patrol. You can see I have my combat gear on the outside. My gloves are off. We don't know if there's going to be contact. If there is, I may don them. Again, depending on the type of gloves that I have, if they're good. For example, sealskin gloves are very, very good for wet weather. But I've got my Goretex on because I want to stay nice and movable, less restrictive than the poncho. You can obviously see that my skin's very bright, so the conversation about camouflage cream when it's raining, because it's very oil resistant, camouflage cream will help shed water. It's just going to get you, the inside of your gloves and everything really, really nasty. So if you've got the wet weather gloves, I would, consider wearing those instead. Apply your cam paint and everything as normal. Again, it's designed to be in these environments, so do not worry about applying cam paint when it's wet. In fact, you may have to kind of keep applying it as you go on throughout the day. Some other stuff you'll notice is my gear's on the outside. Everything's very accessible. Again, I haven't got that poncho, so I am allowing my gear and pack to get wet. So with that, let's talk about how I've waterproofed everything in my equipment, so I don't need to worry about it being exposed to the elements in, again, a light to medium rain, but a torrential downpour. I'm going to want to don that poncho and just make sure that all my gear is staying as dry as practical. So let's talk about boots and footwear. So we spoke about very briefly the types of boots, full grain leather and Goretex. But let's talk about what happens when your feet get very wet or your boots get very wet. So we have a few options. The first one is we want to keep our feet as dry as possible. This means, again, if we're patrolling, if our feet are going to get wet, it's something we'll have to accept. As we walk and as our bodies warm up, if our boot is well ventilated, if it's got some Goretex, if it's not a complete full grain leather boot, then there is the chance of it drying out and permeating. And even then, I've worn full grain leather boots, and as they do warm up, as long as they're not completely getting pounded by the rain, it is going to dry out. It is going to, again, leather is a natural organic material, so it is going to permeate and dry out naturally. If it doesn't, our merino wool sock is going to help keep our foot dry. But if our boots remain wet, say for example, we step into a river, we don't take off our boots, and everything gets permeated, then we can have Goretex socks. So a lot of people think that you wear Goretex socks to stop your feet from getting wet in the first place. That is not what they're for. What the Goretex socks are for is your boot is completely soaked, your feet are completely soaked, and your socks are soaked. What you're going to do is set up some sort of dry area. I'll be demonstrating that later in the video. We're going to set up our dry area. We're going to do a change of socks. So we're going to get our clean socks. We're going to dry it off with a towel, foot powder, dry socks on. We're then going to put our Goretex socks on and then our boot. What this is going to do is allow our foot to remain dry and the boot's going to stay wet, but we're accepting that. So we're accepting that the boot's going to be wet, but we're keeping our feet dry and we can still utilize those boots. Now with our Goretex boots, the big gotcha with this is because we're adding a layer of sock essentially, we're going to have to loosen our boots, not just at the top of the boot, but also the base of the foot. If we keep that tight in the original position, it's going to cut off circulation, which means our foot isn't going to warm up, which means our foot is less likely to dry out. So just a quick little tip, if you do don your Goretex socks because of your wet boots, make sure that you loosen that boot because it's going to allow better circulation and allow your feet to dry off. Right, so now we're going to talk about waterproofing our combat equipment and all of the external gear outside of our main pack, and some considerations that we're going to want to take. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through my chest rig and my webbing. Lots of people run different sorts of equipment. Again, take this as a guideline. Don't copy, don't just replicate what I'm doing, but do what works for you and your environment. Starting off with the chest rig. First of all, this nylon, expect it to get wet, guys. Expect it to get soaked. We don't care about the physical carrier. I think that's something that people get distracted with. They're like, oh no, this is getting wet. Guys, the actual material is meant to get wet. It's your carrying equipment. It's meant to get dirty. It's meant to be a camouflage. It's meant to get wet. So don't worry about that. What we care about is what's on the inside. So let's start with the most obvious. It's going to be your mags. So ammunition comes coated in oil. You don't really need to worry about it getting wet. Everyone knows this. Store your magazine side down. That way any water does flow out. And that's really all there is to it. A lot of these webbing, they've got holes in the bottom to drain that water. so it doesn't get bunched up. But again, some water in your mags, it's not going to hurt it, guys. The gun's going to ultimately eat it. Real easy method that you should consider when it comes to waterproofing is, you know, it should all be waterproof, guys. I mean, your markers, your tools, your chem lights, everything comes in a little package. Obviously, your water bottle, we don't want to get the inside wet. That was a terrible joke. So, you'll see in the main pouches, my compass, I'm not worried about it getting wet. The energy bar, Hearing Pro is already in a waterproof container. So don't worry about, you know, again, these tools getting wet. Stuff like compasses, you know, if they get wet, guy, it doesn't matter. Don't be too fussy about it. Again, magazines side down, the ammunition's oiled, magazines are plastic or metal, they're coated. This is where it gets interesting. So we've got a little boo-boo kit, we've got a little essential survival getaway kit. Make sure that stuff like this, matches, towels, stuff that isn't inherently waterproof, you are waterproofing with plastic bags. What I like to do is I fold it in half and then I fold over. And you can see where that permanent crease is. Medical equipment, we want to keep nice and dry. Band-aids, gauze, it all gets useless once it gets wet. So make sure that it all stays nice and dry. Last thing you want is to go to treat a wound and notice that you cut open a bandage and now it's completely soaked and it's useless. Knives, when it comes to wet weather, I like to apply a thin film of CLP or WD-40 to all of my blades, and that again just makes me feel good and helps mitigate when I'm in a wet weather environment. Come around this side, got a multi-tool and then more mags, again facing down. Natural oils or the natural coating, the factory coating in the ammo isn't going to be something to worry about. Don't drive yourself crazy. Make sure that everything's nice and waterproofed. On the inside of here, again, everything's waterproofed. I got ABD medical bandages, waterproofed, quick clot, and then my Write and Rain notepad with a pencil, and that's all naturally waterproof, of course. So that's that. Coming now to our combat weapon. Mags, of course, waterproofed. What's nice about the PLCE weapon is it's got a waterproof layer. So you've got this really thick, kind of like this material, like PVC material, and that's going to keep it really waterproof. So it might look like it's soaking up the water, but what that is just the outside nylon soaking it up, but everything on the inside is completely dry. Again, drainage holes on the bottom. Come around to the front, water bottles. We've got water purification. You know, use plastic bags, use your common sense, and then just make sure that everything's nice and fastened down. Ration packs are all inherently waterproof. Got a Write and Rain notepad again. So yeah, make sure that it's all good to go, guys. Rations coming across, mess tins, spare socks, you know, spoon, little MRE accessory pack with matches, making sure that it's all waterproofed. So if it's not inherently waterproof, basically put a plastic bag over it is what I like to do. Let's put this all back now. So how it differs, our combat equipment from our main pack, as you're going to see in a moment, is we individually waterproof items in our combat gear because we have to individually access them. This is just water bottles I've got in here. So water bottle, medical kit, whatever it is, make sure that it's all individually waterproofed. Again, we got the knife covered in oil, just to help, you know, keep that blade nice and clean. And then that's going to soak into the sheath and help mitigate that water as well. Essentially what we're aiming for is you should be comfortable with fully submerging your combat or load bearing equipment, and you shouldn't worry about anything getting wet. We're not trying to make it buoyant like we are our packs, but you definitely should be able to submerge these and, you know, fully take it out of the water and not have to worry about anything or the effectiveness or usage of anything. So with that, let's move on to our main pack. All right, so let's talk about the philosophy when it comes to waterproofing our main pack. So on the outside, you've got stuff that you don't mind getting wet, and then again, like our combat equipment is inherently waterproof. So we're talking knives, we're talking snacks, you know, waterproof headlamp. And again, these good packs have a waterproof lining inside them, so don't worry about stuff getting, you know, light rain, medium rain. The pack's going to take care of itself. What we're worrying about is a river crossing or submerging or an extremely heavy rain, but again, we've got that poncho we can drape over the top of our pack. So on the outside, again, stuff we don't mind getting wet. We kept our poncho in here. In our side pouches, we're keeping equipment that can get wet, nothing super sensitive. And then anything we don't want to get wet, we're keeping inside some sort of bin bag, contractor bag, or plastic material. Coming to the inside of the pack now, I'll show you guys. So you see they've got these separate waterproof compartments. This is a space to keep your wet kit. So this first compartment right here is where my Goretex goes. This entire area is sealed off from the main portion of the pack. So this is where my Goretex goes. That way I can take this off, put it in its own compartment, and it's not going to affect the waterproof or the other material items getting soaked. You know, your mat should be waterproof anyway. We don't care about that. Coming inside here, now we're getting to the dry area of the pack. So we've got our field jacket, we've got contractor bag, another way to waterproof stuff. And again, this is all stuff that's inherently waterproof. We've got a poncho, our mess tins, all stuff that can get wet and we will not be affected. Some fuel. And now we get into the dry portion of the pack. So this is what's called a sea line bag. It is essentially one big heavy duty bag. So you'll see that there's a ton of unused space. That's because I can put all of my gear into here in case of a river crossing. We never want to fully stuff this stuff. This is extremely heavy duty. It's got emergency orange on the inside, and that's so we can turn it inside out and use it as an emergency signaling device. This is a Marine Corps one. I forgot the size of this one. I think this is the bigger one or the medium size one, but essentially you want it to be it a contractor bag or whatever you're using to waterproof your pack, you want it to be, you'll see that the size of the pack right here, and this is a tiny bit bigger, and that's because you've got this green portion. We roll this up in order to waterproof it. I'll show you an example. So we get air on the inside. We've actually got this this vent if we want to take air out. Right now it's locked, so we get a ton of air. And we fold the ends on those two black bands. We come around and then we clip it in, and that creates a waterproof seal. Now you would have seen me blow inside this very lightly. That's actually a technique. If you blow into the big channel, it's going to force basically a low pressure of air, and it's going to put air on the inside. It might not look like it worked, but as you can see, it trapped that air pretty well. So if we're doing a river crossing, we can put all this crap inside here, have a nice waterproof, buoyant kind of internal, I'm losing my track of thought here, a nice waterproofed internal part of the pack, and then everything on the outside can get wet. It's not ideal, but you know, it can get wet. So these C-line bags are great. You can do it with a contractor bag, but it might not be as promising. And then inside here we keep everything we don't want to get wet. So we're talking about our hygiene kit, our socks, and of course our uniforms and stuff that we want to keep completely dry. Inside here as well, we have our sleeping system and anything else. So let's go over. Now we've gone over the pack, let's pack this up. Let's go over our tarps and sleeping system. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to get my C-line bag on the outside, kind of just bend over the sides like this. I'm going to place everything down inside the pack. So we'll put our jacket in there. Just working that pack in. And don't worry about trapping air inside there, that's perfectly fine. Okay, so now we've got the stuff inside we want. We're now gonna, again, leave that nice air gap. Blow some air down in there. Yeah, you can see how much air is in there now. We come around like this. Now what's cool about these C-lines is, okay, we've got too much in here. What we can actually do is we can use this vent. We can unlock it. We can let out some air and then we can relock it. So we still have some buoyancy. So we can kind of size it to the pack. And then close that up. All right, so let's go over methods of waterproofing and our sleep systems and tarps. So you guys saw the C-line bag. That is by far the best option for a pack. They're robust, they are well worth the money, and you can control, with that, you control the amount of air that's on the inside with that valve. They're extremely tough. You also get that emergency orange. So when it comes to our tarps and everything, again, this is a crucial part to staying dry. Let's start with this guy. This is the US Marine Corps tarp. This thing is an absolute beast. There is a trade-off when it comes to weight, but it is just, one of the best tarps out there. Double-sided, and will absolutely get the job done. Would 100% trust my life to this. Make sure that, again, you treat it and you waterproof them. This guy here is the British Army tarp. Another fantastic option. Far more lightweight than the USMC one. And what's cool about these is it's got a lot more tie-up points for shelter making. And it also can be used as a stretcher as well. Yeah, you fold them in half and then it's got carry handles around the seams and they can be used as emergency stretcher. What's great about the tarps is, again, we'll demonstrate this in the future, but we can do river crossings with them, and they can also double up as a poncho if we have to keep all of our gear nice and dry, and of course making a shelter. So when going to a wet environment, a good tarp is an absolute must, in addition to our poncho. You guys saw how the poncho can be used for your person. It's important that we have something to protect our equipment, to protect us while we're sleeping. The poncho, again, you can do it, but going back to what we said in the beginning of the video, we want to stay comfortable and operational. you don't want to be toughing it all the time. So these are well worth the space. If you don't want to invest in a sea-line bag or something a little bit cheaper, contractor bags are great. Just a nice, easy way to waterproof equipment. And if you've got to carry extra stuff, you've got a really tough bag to carry them in. Coming over here is your Goretex sleeping system. So it's good to have a tarp, but what we also want is something to sleep in that's waterproof. So this is a US Marine Corps Goretex sleeping bivvy, and it's absolutely great. The new ones are even more fantastic. They're tan and they actually have a bug net, so you can use them in the summertime and it keeps bugs off your face. But this one is very good for cold weather and wet weather because it's completely sealed. So, you know, you've got this big heavy-duty zipper, and you can crawl inside there. Take your Goretex off, put it inside the wet area of your pack, crawl inside this, get up against a tree or your equipment, and you can pretty much have your own shelter. Honestly, this thing is so robust, it's kind of its own shelter in and of itself. You know, this is the hood, you got this Velcro thing, and it's just, I mean, the thing's a beast. You know, you can easily have all of your equipment on inside and crawl inside this thing. So find what works for you guys, but there's some other options when it comes to wet weather and equipment. We want to stay dry, we want a good tarp, and I always have the contractor bag. It's small, it's lightweight, and it gives you another layer and waterproofing option. So now let's talk about your equipment, how to keep it nice in serviceable condition. When it comes to your boots, if it's a leather boot, you can use a good product like this called Snow Seal. So Snow Seal essentially is a all-season leather protectant. It kind of just vitalizes the oils in the leather, and it makes a nice waterproof coating while also allowing the leather to stay nice and supple and breathable. So Snow Seal is a great option. You've also got more modern treatments. Wax makes a product for boots, especially for Goretex as well. But Snow Seal for all leather is a really, really good option, as well as just standard boot polish. Again, it's really good for keeping your boots nice and clean. Whenever you get back from a op in the cold and wet, take off all the mud, clean everything off, and just let everything naturally air dry. When it comes to drying our boots and our equipment, do not put it over a fire. It can damage the materials, it can shrink and crack the leather, it can burn and singe your synthetic materials. So let it dry out in a nice warm room. Our boots, you put sideways, and that's going to allow proper airflow through the boot to allow it to dry off. When it comes to our socks, to dry off in the field, we can put them inside the sleeping bag with us, underneath our belt or by our armpits to dry off. When we're hiking, we can also tuck them in here. Again, another reason for long jackets is that our body heat's going to warm them up, and we can allow our socks to ultimately dry while we're on the move. In terms of if your boots are completely soaked and you are drying them, this is another reason for maybe having something like Crocs or sandals or an old pair of sneakers, something that you can wear and still, if you had to bounce or do something, you can still have footwear and allow your boots to dry. When it comes to our equipment, my favorite product is Wax. So this stuff's great. I hang everything up in my shower room. I let it dry out. Once it's dry, I apply Wax. It's a spray-on wax. Spray it on and then you kind of like rub it in, and then you leave it. I apply it heavier to points where there's equipment or where the rain sheds, like shoulders and your back. And basically what it does is it applies a layer of wax and it waterproofs the equipment. Goretex, cotton, wools, there's different versions for different materials, so make sure that you're using the right one. But again guys, take care of your equipment and it will take care of you. Let's talk about one of the most overlooked bits of equipment when it comes to your wet weather gear. Everyone is about keeping stuff off, but two bits of equipment that are absolutely essential are going to be foot powder and a dry towel. With foot powder and a dry towel, it allows us to physically dry ourselves off. Again, we already accepted at the start of the video that we're not going to be able to say 100% dry, but we can mitigate it. So when we get wet, we want to have the tools to get ourselves dry again. And that's going to be with a good dry towel and foot powder as well. When it comes to foot powder, that also goes into our next section, which is going to be medical. When we are operating in a cold, wet environment or a cold, warm environment, the chance of bacterial infection and fungal infection rises dramatically. This is something that is seldom talked about, but is extremely important. And again, when it comes to staying operational, we have to address. So when it comes to changing our socks, especially in areas that accumulate moisture, if you go to the jungle or somewhere that's very, very humid, or even just in the summertime, if you're out there operating, hygiene is extremely important. And when it starts to rain, we get a lot of moisture. And moisture attracts fungal infections, and it also attracts bacterial infections. So in our medical kit, in a wet weather environment, it's really important that we also have, in addition to the towel and foot powder, some sort of antifungal cream or antifungal powder. You can get dual purpose powders. And also, it should be in your medical kit anyway, but a antibacterial zinc cream or something of that nature. Underneath the armpits, in the crotch area, infections like ringworm are very common. So when in these environments, something to consider, make sure that you take care of yourself. If you start feeling itching or rashing, apply that antifungal or antibacterial, or go seek medical attention. Again, in the field that may be difficult, so we want to have the equipment and tools necessary to treat ourselves and stay operational and not have to go to the back or go back home because we've been compromised by something as simple as failing to stay as dry as possible, and then that leading to an infection. So then, before we step out on a patrol, some other considerations that we want to know is you want to start off cold, just as with any ruck or hike. So you'll notice underneath here, I'm literally just wearing a moisture wicking shirt because I know that my body heat's going to warm up. And remember, we've got a barrier that's going to stop moisture from escaping, and we want to stop water from getting in. So that balance is going to be really hard. Some jackets, this one does not, unfortunately, will have zips here. Open those right up before you start hiking, guys. Open up the armpit zips, get as much circulation as possible. What's nice about this one is I can open this up. You might even start hiking like that with this fully open. So again, keep yourself dry, but make sure that you're mitigating your body heat and temperature and that sweat level that's physically touching your skin. Because if it's cold, when you get wet because of sweat, then you're going to get cold. And obviously that's a path that we don't want to go down. We're now going to demonstrate a wet, dry drill. My boots are wet, my socks are wet, or my uniform's filthy. We just did a river crossing, and I've got to get into dry clothes. Behind me, you'll see a log here. What we're looking for is something to prop up our pack or set up a poncho, but we want to do it quickly. So we're looking for a tree. We're looking for a berm or a fallen tree or some sort of large area that we can just place something up against. So right here, it's off the main path. It's more camouflaged. Again, we're not doing this where we just did the crossing or somewhere that's vulnerable. So we've got cover in here, we've got concealment. So let's head over and start our drill. Okay, so now that we're down here, you can see that I've got a good log. It's about my height when I'm crouching. That's exactly what we want. So again, we're soaked, we're tired, we're cold, but we're out away from the enemy. So let's take off our pack and commence this wet dry drill. So the first thing we're going to do is obviously take off my rifle. If I'm in a team, I want someone having guard Do not do this all at once. And then I'm going to take off my pack. Okay, so now we want to access that poncho. We've got a poncho and the outside is the wet side. We've got the dry side on the inside as we discussed earlier. Put our pack under there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to try to find a nice clear area. So we're going to move some of these sticks out of the way. We want it just kind of flat enough that we can access our equipment. I'm then going to get my poncho. Again, I've got a wet side and a dry side. I'm going to drape this poncho over that barricade like that. What I can do also is I can come around, I can lay my rifle on there as well, or just prop up like a stick or a rock or something to help this not move. So now what we're going to create is essentially a temporary shelter. So from here we can now access our mat. Again, we've got a dry side facing the pack, and what this is just something to put down that we can now kind of place ourselves on. This is pretty hard to video, guys, so I'm going to bring the camera on the inside of this and demonstrate what I'm doing and how I'm going to access this pack at the same time. So now that I've got this set up, again, I've got the poncho over me to keep me nice and dry. From here, essentially what I can do is I can access the inside of my pack. This is why it's important to have a pack that can be accessed from the inside. We're going to take out our sea line again. We can access our nice new socks and also our waterproofed foot powder. You'll notice that I'm zipping everything up. Again, keeping this nice and tidy, ready to go. And you're going to do this with the poncho over you. From here, what we can do is we got our mat, so we can now take a seat and we can begin taking off our socks and beginning that wet and dry drill, doing 1 foot at a time. Now remember, if our boot is completely soaked, what we have to do is apply our Goretex socks. So we've got our Goretex covers. We're going to take that boot off 1 at a time. We're going to put our boot upside down, change our sock while underneath our poncho. It's going to be awkward, it's going to be uncomfortable. It's the nature of the game. We're then going to apply our foot powder and then our new sock, our Goretex sock if our boot's completely soaked, and then put our boot on, do that twice, and then we're essentially ready to go. Now, if you have to change your upper garments or your lower garments, you'll do your upper garments first and then your lower garments 1 at a time. For that, you may need a more permanent shelter like a tarp or basher setup. But for a very quick wet dry drill, you can change your socks this way. Now remember, if it's not pouring rain, you don't need the poncho. For camouflage, it may help. For thermal mitigation, a wet poncho is fantastic. So if you just got wet to the river crossing, you can have your guys take point and you can do this out in the open. So there's lots of options, guys. Again, do what the situation permits. Use your common sense. Well, there you have it, guys. That is an introduction to wet weather equipment and some procedures to help keep you dry and thus operational. As always, thank you so much for making it to the end. I appreciate your time. This community is growing and I really appreciate that we're making it a place of learning. So for closing thoughts today, guys, when it's miserable outside, when no one else is out here doing it, that's probably a sign that you should get out and train. All right, guys, we'll see you on the next one.